Hey everybody, welcome back to Unlimited Commander. I'm joined today, as always, by my lovely co-host Matt. Matt, how's it going?
Oh, woke up the other day, sick as a dog, pushing through it now. I was thinking about taking a break on this one, but I'm really excited about today's topic, so I wanted to make sure that I came in and, you know, gave full effort on it. Other than that, just waiting around for my capture card so that we can start Breath of the Wild. How about you?
Well, mostly just happy to have you. I can see that you're not feeling very well, and I will tell you that I personally appreciate you deeply. Very much enjoy having this show with you, and I don't know that I would have filmed an episode if you weren't available.
Oh, that's so nice. And also good to know that I showed up at the right time then.
Yeah, so I don't have any like real news otherwise. Just been busy around here. We got to play my Commander Cube. Time of recording yesterday. I had a great time, and hopefully you and the other people who joined us did also. And just did some updates. I after that immediately did like 12 updates to my cube. I it's funny how cubes are like that. They're like oh my god, we're gonna make it a circle because a cube is a living, changing thing. And as you play it, you'll find stuff that you're gonna want to update and stuff you're gonna want to remove and change. And new cards come out all the time, and it's like updating all of your decks all at once, always.
Yep. I also played in that cube. It was a lot of fun. I played Crush the Bloodbraided, and I had ended up drafting Terror of the Peaks and Inferno of the Star Mount and a bunch of other like just big dragon Ganics and a bunch of other big dragon stuff. And then I saw none of them for the entirety of the game. But we did get to use Chainer to discard a Hellkite Charger right before Eldest Reborn let me revive a creature, which let me get the Hellkite Charger onto the board. So I can't complain too much. I got to do a pretty fun combo.
Yeah, I really liked the way you played that one yesterday, and I know that it didn't go as your way with you not getting very many forests for a Jund deck, but you did some stuff, and you inspired me for changes for some of my my constructed decks just off of how you played that one. So
That's so good. But yeah, I think that cubes are really fun, and they're the kind of thing that we can all enjoy multiple times because, like you said, we can grow and change it and make the experience different. But even if you don't change it a lot, you can have multiple different experiences with one set of cards, which you don't usually get to necessarily do in a lot of formats.
mhm.
So that leads us into today's topic, I would think.
Yeah, so you want to build a cube. What what makes you want to build a cube? There's a couple of important questions that are going to come up, and before you embark on such a long journey, you're gonna have to ask yourself these things, just so it helps figure out what you want to do with it and how you want to invest your time, because it is no small venture. You will find yourself slaving over this thing for many months and many years down the line, and so you got to know that it's what you want to do and why you want to do it. So why do you want to build a cube?
Well,
That's the first question.
yeah, I think that looking through things, it's like the things that always excite me about cubes is when there's a story behind them, right? And I think all cubes kind of generate stories as they go. But like I know a lot of people who built cubes. The cubes that I've played in were all like, "Oh, I really liked this particular format." So the two big cubes I've played with, as we've talked about in the past, are Conspiracy Cube and Modern Masters Cube. And both of those were created because the person who played it, one, they bought way too many. They participated in so much of that stuff, and they had bought boxes of it so that they could play it, that it was just easy to make a cube out of all the things that they gotten with it. And but they really liked those things. Like they found particular archetypes in Modern Masters that they thought were really fun. So they tweaked their cubes so that you could hit those archetypes better and more frequently and create its own little situation.
Yeah, it's a great thing to identify about like what makes you want to do one because you, as you said, he found a set that he really liked, and that's one type of cube. Uh, Another one, like my personal story, was actually having a deck that I didn't want to build in paper in real life, but I did want to see get played, and that's a point down the line. But everybody has a different reason, and you identifying yours will help pick it because then you follow up with what format do you want your cube to be? As you said, your friend had played a couple of draft sets that he really enjoyed, and so he ended up making what they call a set cube, a couple of them actually. Yeah. So
Yep.
you end up you can build a set cube or you can do it in like a modern cube, a legacy cube. One you'll hear a lot of is like a vintage cube is one that people play pretty predominantly. Lets you experience Magic's entire history in like the format that it was, kind of conceived in of like 40 card 1v1 draft competitive. And then the one that I built, which is probably going to be the focus of at least part of today's episode, is a Commander Cube. One that is designed to play in a multiplayer game after drafting out commander decks and seeing how that goes. Another one is how many people you want to play with. This doesn't seem like something you'd want to decide early on, but it turns out that it's really important because it tells you how big you're going to make the stupid thing. You end up with a certain number of cards required for each person so that they can build a cohesive deck in your draft environment. And so, like for example, the vintage cube we mentioned, you're going to want about 360 cards overall because if you're going to play it with the 8 people on average, each person's going to end up drafting out 45 cards. Quick math tells me that's 360 cards. So knowing that in advance will help you decide how much time and effort you're going to have to put in for picking your favorites.
Yep.
God, I'm really good at these segues today. Pick your favorites. The next thing is starting to gather your cards. And what do you want to put in them? Well, pick your favorites. Is there something that you really like about any given card? Like one of the first ones in mine was Village Rites. A little story I told Matt before we were recording that I ended up in possession of about 25 copies of the Strixhaven Mystical Archive Village Rites. So stuff like that is going to be important for you because this is going to be your adventure and you're going to want to make sure that all of your favorite stuff goes in there so that you can share with your friends your favorite things.
Mm-hmm. I will say that while playing the Modern Masters cube, one of my favorite things is I love Murderous Redcap. Murderous Redcap is one of my favorite cards. It's just this little goblin. It does a little bit of damage. But I love the art on it. I love the flavor of like Lorwyn stuff, which is I think where Murderous Redcap originated from was Lorwyn.
As one of the green black goblins.
Yeah, red black. Yeah,
or red black.
Yeah. And so anytime I got the opportunity to play red black goblins in the Modern Masters cube, I would, because more often than not, people would be accidentally passing on Murderous Redcaps, and I'll take that. I'll take that one. Give me all of them. You want to give me 4? Give me 4. I'll take them.
So that would be so like if you decided to build your own cube, Matt, that would be like the first thing is you would decide how many Murderous Redcaps you're going to put in this thing.
That's right.
Because quick sidebar that I didn't put in any notes is that most cubes end up being singleton, except for set cubes usually end up having multiple copies of various cards to try and simulate the actual draft environment better. However, your cube, your rules, you can put however many of any card you want in there. If you want to put 8 Murderous Redcaps into your commander cube, you do that. Because they're your favorite cards. And sometimes it's not just a card, but maybe it's like a specific theme. You like seeing certain themes, or you like building decks in it, and rather than have like 9 constructed decks of one particular theme, maybe you end up putting it into a cube so that you can see it pretty frequently without having to just own a legacy artifact deck, a vintage artifact deck, a modern artifact deck. You know, like maybe you end up really liking artifacts, and this gives you somewhere to like jam them all without necessarily having to just like recreate them 1,000 times. Bonus points if you actively avoid these in your regular deck building. I bring this up because it was actually my inspiration for building a cube was that a friend of ours, Amplitude, gifted me the Ocon Zndrsplt partner pair and said, I think you would really enjoy building this. And it sat in my binder for a year or two as I sat there continuously looking. You know, you go like, oh, I feel like brewing. And you scroll through your book and you flip some pages and then you land on these and you're like, that would be, maybe it's time. And then it's not time. And it keeps not being time. So that's when I decided that it was time to like build a cube. This was the first thing I did was I put in a Village Rites and I put in Zndrsplt Ocon and I went to town from there because I didn't want to build the coin flip deck, but I did want to see the coin flip deck get played and built. So when you're picking it, pick stuff you want to see and pick stuff that you really like.
Yeah. On that note, like last night when we were playing, one of the commanders that got picked for use was Paco and Haldar. And I have almost built Paco and Haldar at least 7 times. And every time I look at it, I'm just like, I want this deck to exist. I want to be able to play this deck. But I don't trust myself to build it with any sort of regard to who's playing with me and what we're playing. So like it's not good for me to have something around that's just super pure power, because eventually you get frustrated, you pull it out, you use it, you know. So I just keep pushing it off, and then I got to see it in play last night in a more controlled environment, so it was still pretty powerful. Like it was definitely the big threat on the board several times throughout the game, but it didn't feel like someone did it on purpose, you know. Like it wasn't the intentional like spike driven behavior of creating a Paco and Haldar deck. It was just like, this is the way the cards came up, so I drafted Teamer and here's what I built, you know.
That's oh man, dang it. KP, you're on them. What don't you put into a cube? That's our next point. These segues are just flowing. We got a good flow today. Because the first thing that I wrote down was cards that are too powerful for what you want. And it's funny that you say that because it's kind of like tit for tat. In your cube, you don't necessarily want to upset the power balance of the whole cube by putting in something ridiculous. But at the same token, it's somewhere to put something a little bit more powerful where you can control the bits that it's going to have access to. I really like that point. And it's personally one of the things that I did focus on in building my cube, about making sure that the environment was balanced to the point where like even a good card couldn't be broken. I think I mentioned that in a past episode. What was the quote somewhere? A powerful card isn't so powerful without its other pieces.
Exactly. And you know, one of the things that we talked about last night with the cube was that this cube doesn't have Soul Ring, and we'll kind of talk about what you did to kind of fill out things. But one of the things that just didn't end up making it after doing a bunch of switches and stuff was Soul Ring's not a part of the list. And for a lot of people who play Commander, they can't imagine a deck without Soul Ring. So,
yeah, and for a number of reasons, as you said, I didn't include it, but that's definitely one of them. Is that like the explosive turns that Soul Ring creates is fine and dandy if you're sitting in like a pod of constructed decks where people can deal with that level of explosion. And a lot of times, unless you really build it that way and balance it that way, like a cube maybe isn't that place. You know, you're working too hard to keep everything at a reasonable pace and have everything balanced against one another. And then somebody drops a Soul Ring into an Arcane Signet, and now in like this weird semi-controlled environment, you end up with somebody who just powered out their commander on turn 2 when everyone else is like, I play a tap land.
Right. Red green tap land pass.
Yeah. So, turn 2, play a bounce land to return that tap land to my hand. That was my turn 2 yesterday.
Yeah. At least the green was there.
Yeah, yeah. At least we have got there. So, another thing to keep in mind is that archetypes that require too much of the cube to be viable might be something. And I don't have like an exact example of this right now, but
I think
just,
I can give a good one.
yeah.
So, milling is an archetype, right? Milling is one of those things that you either get everything for and you run it, or you don't and you can't. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, self milling is one thing where there's a lot of stuff that kind of does stuff. But if you want to try to mill out 4 opponents, in order for that to work in a cube setting, you'd have to put so much mill in so that somebody could see it's like, oh yeah, the mill twice mono blue commanders in here. I can use that and then all these milling cards and make a milling thing go. But in order for you to do that, you'd have to run well over probably 70, 80, 90 mill cards just to make sure that it distributed in the packs hard enough for someone to say, yes, this is worth it, and then not get hated out by another player who's like, well, I'm not getting milled today.
Yeah. And that's not to say that you can't include some in stuff like that, because you can definitely still run some mill stuff. You can have like a strategy that benefits from the value that it generates. I think what you're referring to is specifically the all out mill, like
the all
my
out
win con is
win
mill my
con,
opponents.
right?
Yeah. Because you're right. And I do have some mill in mind, but it's for the value. And I agree. I don't think I would want to have a mill specific deck like archetype in there where like the whole point is to just like mill everyone out. That just sounds silly.
Yeah.
A little bit tougher. So cards that upset the balance of the cube is going to be one you're going to want to keep an eye out for. As we said, like I didn't include Soul Ring, partially because it's too strong, partially for other reasons. But like cards that are too weak is also something to keep in mind of. Like it's a little bit different when you're doing a cube. You don't actually need Draft Chaff.
Yeah.
Like the idea is that you're curating a list of your favorites, and whereas in like an actual draft set, if you go and crack a box of boosters and spread them around with your friends, like you do want Draft Chaff. It does add something to the game and like the drafting strategy. But when you're doing a cube, it's more about like the perpetual excitement throughout the entire thing. Oh my god, this is in here. Oh, what do I pick? These are so good. You want like your last 2 or 3 picks to still have some sort of relevance. I mean, they'll still get cut. You'll end up cutting a lot of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But you still want it to be like exciting as they're going through, because these are your favorite cards.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all of them. Maybe some stuff you have to put in just to make stuff function. But you handpicked all of this.
One of the things on that is like, we've talked a few times about being budget and friendly conscious, and a lot of people will think, well, in order to reach a particular budget thing, I might need to run these bad cards. But remember that Magic is a game with 30 years of background at this point, and there are a lot of really good cards like that end up being pennies on the dollar because there is a slightly better version of them, right? Like I believe it was Goblin Guide who tanked for a little while right after Ragavan came out, because Ragavan became the new like modern staple in Red. It's not that you would never run Goblin Guide, but if you have a choice between the two, you're going to run Ragavan. So Ragavan shoots up to $100, and Goblin Guide cuts down to under $5, and then you're in a position where you're like, okay, here's a good card that I like that I want to run, and it's way cheaper because there's an alternative for the high sweaty players. So in that note, that means that you don't have to run really, really bad cards. You could just run good cards that aren't the best card. And that will hit that same notion of like balancing both for power and for budget.
Yeah. And like, again, I dread the thought of putting Ragavan into a cube because that just sets the tone for the rest of the cube. Honestly,
It
like
really does.
if you're gonna do that, make sure to have all your other super sweaty stuff. Make sure you have your mana crypts and your mana vaults. Make sure you have all the grossest stuff, like have your Rhystic Studies and your Smothering Ties, right? Like it just sets a bar. And so if you can avoid stuff like the Ragavans and the Rhystic Studies, then it gives you a little bit more of a dynamic environment, and you're not just trying to like build a constructed deck. That's one of the big things about draft is that like you're not trying to build a constructed deck. You're trying to make a cohesive deck out of the things that have been given to you. And that goes with any draft. Like crack a pack, look at the cards, pick one, try and build out of that. If you don't have a pile of like ultra staples, then you have a little bit more fun with it. You're not just putting together the deck you have sitting in a deck box over there.
Yeah. On that note, so at this point, I have, 1,000 cards that are my favorite cards in the game. What's next? What do I do?
So you got to figure out what your archetypes are. This is probably the hardest one, if I have to be totally honest. After you like pick your favorites, put them in a pile, and everything we're going to talk about after this is the hardest part, and it's really tough. But it's also like probably the most important, because this is where you end up really doing like your game designer thing. You put on your game designer hat. You are the Gavin Verhey, Mark Rosewater of your own existence, and you start figuring out how you want this to play. Because if you look even on Arena nowadays, actually, and the odd time, like I don't know if I have one around, but in the token slot, sometimes you might get a card in a booster that says something along the lines of do I even have no, like, you get one of these in your booster, and on one like on either side of it, it outlines your draft archetypes, so that you can actually know what it is you're shooting for. Because if you put in a pile of cards, and sometimes it'll work, like let's be reasonable, there's a lot of cards that go into these things, and you crack a pack, and if you stick to colors, you're probably going to be okay for the most part. But what you want it to do is feel cohesive. You want to have your white green tokens, and you want to have your blue black self mill. Like, you're going to want to identify your archetypes, and some of them will pop to you as you were going through. As we said, like if you picked, say, a deck that you didn't want to build in paper, and you decide to put it in your cube, that gives you one archetype, because then you can figure out around that point what you want to do in those colors. And then you have other cards that are your favorite that are going to kind of tell you what you should be doing in those. And you'll have some of them just like pop up and give you direction. But then you're going to have to figure out what you want to do with the other color setting, the color pairs. Because the other thing is that, like a cube, like any draft set, it's going to be really hard to stick to like a monocolor at like any point. It's doable if like in the draft itself, you were getting past only one color, like you managed to accidentally draft. I think one draft ever, I drafted a monocolor deck, and hilariously, I scrubbed out of that draft so hard because the one color wasn't enough to support, because just drafting one color in a regular draft usually ends up leaving you with two halves of a deck, because they want to pair with other colors to do a thing, anything really. So identifying what archetypes you want to do in your cube is going to help you flesh out the rest of it and balance it out and make sure that everybody can have a good experience when they're drafting it.
When we went over this episode, we did a lot of like theory crafting and math stuff behind the scenes. And one of the big things that we ended up talking about when we were talking about identifying archetypes is identifying your strengths and the things that you're good at seeing within archetypes, but also identifying your personal weaknesses and like knowing, like, I personally am not good at building effective blue-white decks. My blue-white decks end up being a lot of value with no payoffs or anything like that. And a lot of people who are bad at blue-white are just like, that's just the way blue-white is. It's value and no payoffs. But there are people who are very successful at building blue white in a draft, or like seeing value in things that are harder to see value in. And so in those cases, when you're building for your blue white side of your cube, if you don't know what to do, talk to people that you'll be hanging with and
Mm-hmm.
working with and playing this cube with, because they might see something that you don't, that you're like, oh yeah, I do want that to be fleshed out.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, and again, this wasn't written down, but I think I had it in my original draft of this episode, which I lost while upgrading my computer. RIP that draft. Uh, One thing that I think I even wrote down is that like a really good, helpful spot to look, and it's something that they've done for a long time, but more recently has been a known quantity, is what they call signpost uncommons. And in the last couple years, for sure, of draft sets that they've been putting out, they have one uncommon that is for sure the color pair or color grouping that matters in that set, that will tell you what that color grouping wants to be doing. I just saw one that I actually just managed to slip into a commander deck that I just built not too long ago, was the come on Skyfall Bladehold War Whip, which is a red and a white for an artifact equipment that has 4 Mirrodin, which means when it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, then attach this to it. Equipment abilities you activate of other equipment cost 1 less to activate. Equipped creature has double strike, and it equips for 3 red white. And this is an uncommon from All Will Be One. And this tells you exactly what red white wants to be doing in that draft archetype. It is all about finding equipment, equipping it to things, and punching faces. So if you start looking at these uncommons that come out of some of your favorite sets and identifying what those do, those will give you an idea of how you would like to flesh out the cube and identifying your archetypes. That's just one little tidbit that I completely forgot to write down for this episode.
Well, in the same way though, like there are older ones, like now they use the term signpost uncommon, but there used to also be signpost commons. Like Grizzly Salvage was a huge thing in its particular format. I want to say we're looking at
Return to Ravnica.
Return to Ravnica, right? And it's a green and a black instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them into your hand or a creature and put the rest into your graveyard. So it did self mill, it did a little bit of filtering, it gave you a card, and it was a way of letting you know, hey, this is what Golgari does. You mill yourself, then you resurrect, or you build, you get land, you get creatures, and you swing. And it gave you everything you needed to know off of just one common in the set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. I actually forgot about that because also in the Ravnica blocks, they did, like, for example, the charms. Any charm from what was it? There was the Ravnica sets had charms. The Cons block had charms, so like Temur charm, Sultai charm.
Yep.
And then
New Capenna had charms.
Yeah, New Capenna had charms as well that kind of gave you ideas. So like if you look at something like the various charm cycles from sets, the Ascendancy cycles, the Confluence cycles, like these cycles that you see pop up in sets that kind of give you an idea of like everything that a color grouping wants to do. And so if you can take some inspiration from those, it'll help you in the long run to flesh out what your archetypes are and how you want to balance the cube, which is the next thing about color balance. It's probably like the last really important note. Your colors need to be. Yep.
Can I just throw in here real quick? So earlier this week, I think it was earlier this week or later last week, we had a conversation with a stream grouping on mathematics and how much everybody hates it. And look, I get it. As a former math teacher and someone who's been playing card games for 20 years, 25 years, I get it. Like, I completely understand why people are hesitant about math, how new things are kind of weird to them. You usually learn it in one way. If you have to learn it in another, it messes you up. I get all of that. That being said, like, math is such a huge part of doing these cube things. And when you do them, you won't even realize that you're in that state. You know, like, you're like, oh, well, you know, I've got to do this and I got to balance these different things. And so this next bit is on color balance is such a huge portion of like the math that goes into building a cube, because it's not just make sure you have an even number of red cards to green cards to blue cards to whatever. It also has to do with color pips. It has to do with your 2 colors and your 3 color cards. You know, if you want to go into wedges, you don't want to just say, okay, there's 2 cards here that are 2 blue and 2 black, and 1 card here that's red, white, and green, 1 red, 1 white, 1 green, and that's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's going to completely change the way people dramatically draft your set. So if you do have hangups about math and you want to do these cubes, first try doing it and then think about your hangup on math again, because maybe you don't have as big of a hangup as you think you do.
Some of the and it's very true. And I will admit that I didn't go as far as like pip balancing and like color distribution as much as just sheer number of cards in that color. Because I will tell you, when you start going into like larger numbers and like my cube is much bigger than 360 cards because it's a commander cube. So like as I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't care how many color pips are on this card as long as it's that color setup. So, and this is just me personally, and as you go through, you will find that you're going to look at some of this stuff and say, okay, I retract. I retract in the sense that I'm pretty sure I didn't put anything in that was like more than 4 of one color pip.
And I think also there's an amount of instinct that ends up coming along with this later. Like when you are like reforming your cube or you're augmenting your cube, sometimes you'll look at a card and be like, no one has ever played this card. Why have they never played it? Well, it's probably because it costs 2 black, 2 green, and 2 red. I should put in something that's similar to it but easier to play, even if it's in the same color pairing, because people are more likely to care about it. One of the cards we were just kind of having a side tangent talk about earlier today, Grave Pact versus Dictate of Erebos. Grave Pact has 3 black pips in it. Dictate of Erebos only has 2 pips in it and is essentially the same card, slightly better, slightly more expensive, but easier to cast. In a cube setting, that's something that you might go, yeah, I should be thinking about this instead, because people who are playing 3 colors don't want to have triple black pips and whatever it is they're trying to play.
Yeah. And you'll find that out, like, once you have it in like all together and you start testing it and playing it and even doing like your own test drafts, because most of the sites that you can put a cube on have like a little draft test thing. And but you'll find that like the sentence I wrote down is they don't have to be equal as much as they have to be supported. And once you start building it and looking through, that sentence will make a lot more sense, because it didn't make any sense to me until I started looking at actually building one. Is that like you don't have to have 10 of each color as much as you need to make sure that like the 5 green cards are all have like the equal number of green like non-basic lands and are going to be picked in a fairly decent ratio if you're doing 2 color and stuff like that. So it'll come together. But
I think that phrase though is one of the most powerful phrases when it comes to building anything. Like, well, you can take this as part of cube, but also just part of deck construction. It does not have to be equal as much as it needs to be supported. Your red, blue, green crush deck, if you're just doing plain constructed, does not have to be equal parts red, black, green. It just has to have the enough support behind it so that if you are playing something with 4 black pips in it, you can pay for it. And that goes for land bases too, which is also kind of a part of building the physical cube and making sure that it's like, okay, this deck has a lot of heavy pips, so I might run 1 or 2 more dual lands in that color in my cube than I might have run otherwise, because I know that these 2 colors are heavy, so I'm supporting that.
Yeah. And then a couple quick notes before we get on to our mid-roll is just like physical stuff, assembling the physical part of the cube. 2 things that I wish somebody had told. Well, one thing I knew already, and one thing I wish somebody had told me. First off, you need to have a lot of basic lands on hand to go with your cube when you assemble it. And it's important to pick them in advance because of the second point, which is how many sleeves you'll need. And a great story on another time about my own personal cube, and might come up a little because of some of my choices in building mine, but you need matching sleeves for every card in the cube and every basic land that goes with it, and any tertiary things, which might not make a lot of sense right now, but maybe it will in a bit. But like, if your cube is 360 cards, then you need that 360 plus some extras in case some break, plus 1 sleeve for every basic land, because you're going to shuffle all these up into a deck and put them and then play with them. So all of your basic lands need to be in the exact same sleeve, and you're going to need a bunch of basic lands, because if you're going to build 8 decks out of these, and on average you're going to need 17 lands in a draft deck, then you need to make sure that you have enough that if 2 people each draft the same color pair, that they have enough basic lands to support them, and you have enough to spread out for those who went into maybe a 3 color if that's your jam. So like, I have 48 of each basic land sleeved up and ready to go with my cube, which is an 8-player commander cube. I don't suggest that everybody needs 48. You'll figure out what your actual number is, but just know you need a boatload of sleeves. So consider that when you're getting your cube together, and please find some inexpensive way to get them, but just know that you're going to need a bunch.
Yeah, just know that as far as basic lands are concerned, in general, most stores, most LGSs will be more than willing to supply you with basic lands if you just go in and ask. If you end up in an LGS that doesn't just supply you with basic lands, if you just go in and ask, go to another LGS. Trust me, there's usually one in every town that is good enough to try to support the players who are going to be spending money at their store.
When I will also go ahead. I was just say also, like, if you're at the point in your Magic career where you're building a cube, you probably have a giant box of them laying around.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I got to pick 48 unique printings of each type of basic land out of just what I had laying around. I don't have any duplicate basic lands in my cube because of just like all the basic lands that I had laying around. And that's not including any fancy ones. I don't have any fancy ones. Mine are all just like generic basic lands that came out of the box of basic lands that I've been collecting for literally decades. So like, if you're at this point, you probably have the required number. But Matt is right. Don't pay for basic lands. Ask a friend. Tell them you're building a cube. Can you spare some basics? Everybody will have some for you.
Ask a friend, ask an LGS. And when it comes to sleeves, just remember that obviously your store needs to make money too. So there are going to be times where it's going to be hard to get stuff. Just be like, hey, I'm trying to build a cube. I know I need this many sleeves. I'm particularly a fan of figuring out how many sleeves you need and then doubling it. That's personally my preference. But even if you just add 2 more packs of whatever, like 2 more packs of 60 or 2 more packs of 100, depending on what sleeve you're buying, you could be like, I'm looking to buy this many sleeves. Can you do something for me? And again, usually an LGS will have a color that just doesn't sell. they've been holding on to this color for ages because it's puke green or something like that. And you don't care. You just need a lot of them. And so I've had times where I've gone to my LGS and picked up dandelion yellow sleeves in thousands for $2 a pack or something like that, because they knew that it wasn't going anywhere. It's like, just give it up. Just give them up to me, and I'll do what I can, and they'll appreciate it and you'll appreciate it. So just talk to them. If you can't work it out, you can't work it out, but give them a shot.
Yep. Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Let's play some random Scryfall evaluation.
Let's do it.
I have one for you here.
What do we got?
I have Spoils of the Vault.
Ooh.
Which is 1 black for an instant that says name a card, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal the card named. Then put all the cards into your hand. Put that card into your hand and remove all other cards revealed this way from the game, and you lose 1 life for each of those removed cards. Okay, it gave me the Mirrodin version. I'm going to read the Ultimate Masters one just in case it has better right. Yes, it does. Okay.
Slightly.
Sorry. Choose a card name, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card with that name, then put that card into your hand. Exile all other cards revealed this way, and you lose 1 life for each of the exiled cards. That's much better.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we're going to do with random Scryfall evaluation is we're going to take a look at a random card. We're going to check it out and see how we feel about it from a draft/sealed perspective, a commander perspective, and a cube perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Hit us with some limited.
Okay.
What do you think?
So in Mirrodin, I believe Mirrodin is old enough that again, draft was like, it was a thing, but it wasn't like formulaically built yet, that they were trying to build sets with draft in mind. So I couldn't tell you how spoils would work in Mirrodin itself. I also didn't play during that time period. I know there's a lot of artifacts, so there's a good chance that maybe you get 2 or 3 copies of a pretty decent artifact in your set, and this is a good way to filter to make sure that you get the card that you want to get. In Ultimate Masters, I feel like this is a very decently useful card, because usually you're looking in Master sets and in Horizon sets, you're usually looking for some kind of bomb. You're looking for 1 big mythic or 1 big rare that you got to clean up the game nice and tidy. So Spoils of the Vault is going to be the kind of card that's going to get you to that card no matter what. Now, hopefully you don't kill yourself in the process, but, if you feel really good about the way your deck's built, or if even, like I said, you've got 4 copies of something that isn't a rare but is very useful to your build, a Signpost Uncommon, say, then use this, get to it. It's going to work out for you. So if this is something that you ended up getting in a draft, you're probably going to take it unless there's something else in the pack that screams what you're doing. In sealed, it's not quite as good because you just don't get that consistency of cards, and you don't want to lose 20 life in the process.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that, like, I actually would probably, like, if I got this in sealed, I would have to know, and if I got this in draft, I would pass it. This isn't for me. Yeah. I would probably say something similar in Commander. Like, this as a Commander card, this is super sweaty.
It is. Like, it's only going to be played in decks that you can really abuse it, right? Mm-hmm. There's another card similar to this that was big in the brawl scene on Arena for a while. It was
go ahead.
Oh, it was released in the Strixhaven Mystical Archives, but it's essentially like flip card until you flip for a card that you've already seen in the pile, and then exile the rest. So there was a self-mill deck that you'd like play Thassa's Oracle, and then in response play that card, mill your entire deck because there are no 2 copies of any single card in your deck. and then immediately win because of Thoracle going off.
Mhm.
That's the kind of things that you'd be looking to do with something like Spoils of the Vault in Commander.
Yeah, and that's like the requirement for top deck manipulation, and like sure you could do it. Like it's like a really bad demonic consultation.
Yeah, demonic
Like
consultation. That's it. Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's a really bad demonic consultation,
yeah.
and
Now that
because of
being
how bad
said,
it
if
is.
you've got life gain and self mill things in your deck, you might be able to go all the way with this. You know, like it's something that you'll see like niche decks built when it first comes out because people will be like, oh, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to make a lab maniac self mill deck uh, that just plays lab man, gets my life total high enough that I can ditch this and name a card
Yeah.
that's not in my deck, and then flip my entire deck off to the side.
Yeah,
I pick Harmless Offering. Boom.
Yeah, I pick planes in my Grixis deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, done. As far as cube goes, this is a big old pass for me. I mean, maybe somebody will want it in their cube to like be like I just said, like a bad demonic consultation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if they're looking for something like that in that deck, but I don't see it. It's super niche. It can't cover enough archetypes, and like what else do you have to be doing in your cube for this to be useful? I would suggest looking at other options if you're looking for like a draw card or a tutor card or something like that. Like you can find lots of low, like very budget friendly tutors for all sorts of stupid things. Like rather than this, I would rather just play like Diabolic Tutor. Like it's a 4 mana uncommon, still tutors. If you really need the tutor effect in your cube, you have better ways to do it that don't like mess with the balance of your cube.
Yeah, and it's probably not going to kill you. And
Yeah.
I think the cost of this card reflects that a lot because this card hasn't been printed in at least 2018 was Ultimate Masters.
Yeah. So 5 years.
5 years it's been since its last printing, and before that closer to 10-15, and it's 28 cents. So
Yeah.
As a rare being 28 cents, usually that's a good sign that it didn't do it. It didn't get there. So
it ain't great. You could probably find some like room for it in some sort of like kitchen table constructed, but
oh yeah,
I wouldn't bother. Cool. Well, it was nice to have a card that we didn't immediately love.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna touch on a couple things on how to make it a commander cube. This is kind of why we're here. It's good to touch on what a cube is, how to build one in general. But say you want to make it into a commander cube. I know there's a couple floating around the internet. There's mine. I know that Mental Misplay has one floating around, and a couple people like Command Zone has a video about commander cubes, but that's like a couple years ago now. But they exist. They exist. So what do you got to do to make it a commander cube? Any tips before I go into what I wrote down?
Once again, we're going to talk a little bit about math and theory crafting here. So, big warning ahead of time. But just remember that everything that applies to a commander cube is stuff that we've already touched on, just in a wider net of cards. In order for you to build something that resembles commander, you're going to have to build bigger decks than what you built in sealed or draft. So using those concepts just scaled up is a good place to start.
Very true. And that's kind of like my first point here anyway, is like how many cards are in the deck. So usually you do a 40 card deck in a regular drafting environment, either cube or a draft set. Commander went up to 60 cards with the Commander Legends draft set, and a lot of people are sticking to that. I personally did stick to that. So then you're going to want to upsize your overall cube and your pack size and stuff like that to adapt. The math, this is where the math comes in. Personally, I do 3 packs of 18 cards, making a total of 54 cards per person to make a 60 card deck. Plus, I got a special rule.
Yep.
And then as a general rule of thumb that we kind of figured out, you're going to want a few more cards, give or take, available to each player than their final deck size will be. So, for example, in a regular draft, you draft 45 cards, and then you build a 40-card deck, which includes basic lands. In My Commander Cube, in the end, you end up with 62 cards to build a 60-card deck, including your basic lands. So, work out your math on how many cards you want in the cube, figure out how many packs you want to do, break it down like that. It'll make more sense in practice than what I can do here. I need a chalkboard and,
I
my
can
own
give,
math degree.
A quick scale though, right? Like it's like, so when you are playing sealed, normally you end up with 90 cards and then you end up building down. And in draft, you end up with 45 and you end up building down to 40. Those numbers, almost slightly more than the deck minimum and twice as much as the deck minimum, is about where you want to be when you are talking about draft and sealed respectively. So I actually would like to touch on your rule if we can do it now, because I think what you've done is really, really cool. I think it's something that people should know.
My rule.
Yeah. So we have 3 times 18, which is 54. Where did the other 8 come from? What are those other 8?
Oh, I see what you're saying. What did I do? So this skips way ahead, but now we're in that, so we'll probably just skip that at the end. So in order to accommodate some of the things in Commander specifically, what I did is I also made a bonus pack for each player. No soul rings, of course, because it didn't work out for the number of sleeves I had. Funny story. We'll look it up on the internet some other time. But to kind of create the feel of Commander, where there's like a few things that everybody has in their Commander decks, and to also alleviate how many like fixing things and ramping things I needed to put in the deck just for my own like enjoyment of what cards are getting put in there. I made a bonus pack that has things like Command Tower and Arcane Signet and Commander Sphere. Yeah. So like every player gets access to 8 more cards, in my case, than what they're drafting. So that fleshes out from 54 to 62. And that made it so that I could make the draft a little bit more fun. So you're not focused on like, oh, I'm building a Commander deck, I better get ramp. And like some ramp is in there. But in general, it's mostly so that I could just make the draft more fun and give everybody access to Commander iconic cards.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this now is because I want to talk about how brilliant this is just for a minute. I just kind of want to dote on this for a second, because one of the hardest things when you're building something like a cube is how many quote unquote boring cards do you run, right? Like it's like, oh, I've picked all my favorites. I've gotten to do all this stuff, but the green decks are going to need cultivates. The red decks are going to need something similar to Jessica's Will or, Seething Song, something like that. Every deck is going to need some kind of ramp focus. Maybe it means that I have to throw medallions in every deck. Maybe it means I'm running Moxen if you're one of those high-level, high-price, fancy people, But you're going to throw in some sort of ramp and other boring cards like ramp because you have to. This setup completely eliminates that from having to be a thing. So the only ramp that goes into the drafting process are ramp that are inherently fun to do. It's not just a space for rando things to happen. You have 8 cards that you can count on, and like you said, do give the flavor of playing Commander. Arcane Signet, Command Tower, Commander Sphere. All of these cards are inherently Commander focused. They are inherently ramp cards or fixers so that you are able to play your 2 to 4 color deck. And it always gives you this moment of like, now I know for sure I will be able to play whatever commanders I draft. I don't have to worry about that. Let me focus in on what will make the game viable, what will make this deck fun, what will make it playable with the rest of the community. And it also does the heavy lifting of changing 3 times 1854, just under what you need to build a deck, to 62, just over what you need to build a deck, which is exactly where you want to be in draft. Personally, I think it's genius.
Well, thank you. I stole the idea. I don't remember from where. I wish I could credit them, but when I was looking it up, I saw somebody have something similar. It's not quite like I adapted it, but it was definitely an idea I saw, and I'm happy that it's doing what I want it to do. Honestly, as someone who plays my cube with me, probably among the most, like, I think Libby would be the one who plays my cube the most, aside from me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear that it's doing exactly what you want, and you'll find that you're going to end up adapting things. I'm going to skip a whole other section here. We're just gonna scoot down here, because you're going to add other Rule Zero type things to your cube as you're doing it. Like, on top of the bonus starter pack, I also very happily jammed in some of the playtest cards that came out of mystery boosters, cracking those when mystery boosters were hot like a couple years ago, and seeing these goofy playtest cards. They're not legal anywhere. They're not even really cards. And I was like, no, that's stupid. I think this one's cool. One of my favorite ones in there. Well, I got two favorite ones. One of them is like the Spellmorph Raise Dead, which is a great card to pull in this stupid cube, honestly. And then the Evil Boros Charm, which has a fun story behind it too. It's ends up being like a Mardu colored charm, because they made it either like red and white or 2 black, or like it's like hybrid red.
Yeah, it's like hybrid Rakdos, hybrid Orzhov, and then it creates like a you can do Boros or Orzhov or Rakdos, or just straight black.
Yeah, and that was because like they found out in development that when you color something into Rakdos, into Boros, it also kind of acts like mono black. And they thought that was funny. They made it into a card, and I thought it was funny, and I put it in my cube.
Yeah.
So you can do junk like that. The uncards, if you want. You can write your own stupid cards and put them in there. Like, a lot of people on Twitter are always posting like stuff that they designed personally and stuck in there. So you're going to find that you get to like wiggle any of this stuff around. The one that like Brandon Sanderson's cube that they played on game nights had a lot in there, and we don't have time to go through it all today, but like there's some serious junk in there. Like, he made he made creature cards legendary for the purpose of being your commander. He made cards be other creature types to like play into a theme. Like, you can do whatever you want. I'm not at that point with mine, but looking down the line, like, there's a lot of customizability if you want. And I strongly suggest checking out his cube. I will find something to link it in the show notes. Do not know where I'm going to find it. That's a later Adam problem.
Yeah.
And one more thing that's important to note about a commander cube specifically, just before we wrap up for the day, is it's important to figure out how you're going to get / provide commanders for people. There's a couple different options out there that the internet has shown. I know that there are some commander cubes where you get a pack before everything starts, and you pick commanders out of that, and then like there's nothing in the cube, but you're drafting it just like a regular deck. I don't like that one. There's ones where I don't even remember. I'll tell you about mine. What I did was I actually just jammed a crap ton of legendaries in. My personal cube has like over 100 legendary cards, and I took some from the partners from the original Commander Legends. I took the choose a background and some background enchantments, and I jammed them in from Battle for Baldur's Gate, and some just general like legendaries I liked in 2-color and 3-color groupings. So like there is no chance you can't get a legendary to play. And one other one that I saw is that like on top of one of the other options that we've discussed here is that just in general they had like a pile of legendaries that were all just kind of butts, where in the weird circumstance that you couldn't actually draft commander in the colors that you drafted into, you could just pick one of these not great but serviceable legendaries to just like put at the head of your deck. Plus, I'm sure anybody would be fine if you did like the faceless one prismatic Piper junk.
Yep. And like I said, it's your cube. So if you also want to just do like in Pauper EDH, you can use any common or uncommon as your commander. It does not have to be legendary. So you could do that in your cube if you want to. Like, you can create any rules that you need to do in order to make things right. But one of the beauty of the last few years is that they've been putting out lots and lots more legendaries because, one, they want there to be a more epic feel, and they want you to be able to play commander with whatever they give you. But also it creates a nice little sub-theme of making your deck more singleton use and like fitting the idea of playing more singleton. So if they're already giving you all these legendaries and you like what the legendaries do, bonus, you're set for commander cubing, you know?
Yeah. So also like the signpost uncommon legendaries that are always coming out. Those are a great place to like jam those because then they're just useful at some point, even if you don't end up with them. But like, really, the biggest piece of advice I think I have as a very humble cube builder, apparently, is to just do it. Put your pile of cards together, start looking at it, throw it onto one of the websites, play with the tester on there, start tinkering around, ask other people what they think of your cube, try to play your cube. That's the important part. And just keep in mind that as you're going through this process, a cube is a living, changing thing. We brought it around.
Perfect.
And yeah, there we go. So just do it. And you'll find that as you're building it and experiencing it and tweaking it, that you're going to find that you want it to look a certain way. You're going to decide on things to change and things to keep. And all in all, it's going to be yours. And it's going to be your baby. And you're going to love it forever. But, gang, that brings us to the end of our night, day, whatever, end of our show. So, Matt, thank you again.
Always.
And we will catch you next time on Unlimited Commander.
Bye, everyone.
If you liked what we had to say, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support goes directly to growing and improving the show.
You can also like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Make sure to comment or leave a review. The cast can also be found on Twitter at Unlimited Commander.
You can find Matt's Twitch, Twitter, and other YouTube projects at knowledgepoolmtg.com.
And Adam can be found on Twitch and Twitter at Adamus_Prime86.
Our theme song is Polaroid by Harris Heller, licensed by Creative Commons.